It was the end of April, and I was moving out of my home in Chicago all the way to Nevada. I hired a company to take all my boxes and ship them to the new house, just to make it a little bit easier on me. I wanted to take a road trip down there, stay at some hotels or Airbnbs on the way, and just relax for a few days. The total drive would take around 30 hours, so I split that into thirds and decided I would drive 10 hours each day and stay somewhere overnight. After planning out the times, I figured that my first day would have to be on the far edge of Nebraska. I scrolled through Airbnb, looking for anything cheap, as Nebraska didn't really have much to see. So I really just wanted a place to stay for 8 hours, and then head back out on the road. I found a small one-story home with 2 bedrooms. Although I didn't really need the 2 bedrooms, the price was a really good deal, so I didn't mind the extra space. However, I did find it a little bit strange that they only showed pictures of 1 bedroom. Again, though, it didn't make much of a difference to me, so I booked it for the next night and got ready for bed. In the morning, I finished packing up my car with the rest of what I had and started the drive. I left a little bit later than I had wanted to, but I figured it wouldn't be much of a big deal other than having to drive in the dark for a few hours. If you've ever driven through Nebraska, you would know that it's very plain. There are long stretches, hundreds of miles long, of barely any light or buildings at all. A couple of hours after dark, I pulled up to the Airbnb. It was off the long, empty road I'd been on and down a short gravel path. Initially, I was a little bit disappointed as it looked a lot more worn down on the outside than they had shown in the pictures. I reminded myself that I was only staying for a few hours just to sleep, so it didn't matter too much. I grabbed a couple of my bags and headed to the front door. Usually the owners leave the key in a key box and give you the password, but this door had no key box. In fact, it actually had no lock at all. It was one of those plain doorknobs you'd usually see on a closet door. I started to get a little uneasy, but I didn't really have any other options but to stay here. I opened the door and stepped in, and to my surprise, it was actually fairly nice on the inside. It was small, but the living room and kitchen were well furnished and seemed to be kept up with. I went to the first bedroom but noticed that it too did not have a lock. Thankfully, the second bedroom did, so that's where I decided to unpack. There was one thing that really creeped me out about this bedroom, though. Right in front of the bed, on the wall, was a small old doorway, maybe 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. This was the actual picture I took of this doorway in the room. The more I looked at this door, the more unsettled I got. But there was no way I was staying in a room that I couldn't lock. I tried to open it just to check what was behind it, but it was locked from the other side. I figured the owner probably just kept some cleaning supplies back there or extra towels or something. But still, the door gave me the creeps. I was getting pretty tired though, so I only unpacked what I needed for the night and started to get ready for bed. I woke sometime in the middle of the night, hearing a soft tapping noise coming from the edge of the bed. It was very subtle, but the whole house was silent, aside from the tapping. I reached blindly for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight as quickly as I could. As I shined the light toward the edge of the bed, the tapping stopped. I'm not one to get scared easily. Sure, I'll get creeped out or nervous, but never scared. But something about that small doorway at the edge of my bed in that moment made me truly scared. I jumped out of bed, turned on the lights, grabbed everything, and rushed out of the house as quickly as I could. It was still really dark outside, and I couldn't see much, but as I was backing my car out of the gravel path, I swear I saw a man lying on the ground behind the house. I drove down the road for probably 30 minutes before pulling over and texting the owner to tell him that there might be someone in his house and to call the police. I continued down the road for a couple of hours until I found a small town and parked in a grocery store parking lot just to get some sleep. I still don't really know what happened at that Airbnb, but the creepiest part was that when I checked my phone in the morning, I saw my message had been read just a few minutes after I sent it, but the owner never responded. My boyfriend and I were visiting my parents back in Michigan for a few days, and we didn't want to stay with them for, let's just say, obvious reasons. We ended up finding an Airbnb about 15 minutes away from their house, a cute little one-bedroom condo. The inside was completely redone, very modern, so it wasn't the cheapest. The host seemed nice and had good ratings, but we did see a few comments that raised some red flags. Most of the negative comments mentioned strange experiences with the neighbor. Now, I've had some crazy neighbors, so I'm not one to judge. I simply brought it up with the host before booking, and she stated her neighbor was nosy, and that sometimes when people try to get into the Airbnb, she gets defensive. But the host said she'd let the neighbor know we were staying and what we looked like, so everything should be fine. On the day we arrived, everything went smoothly. We met the host, who lived nearby, and she gave us the key to the entry door and the code to the actual apartment. We unpacked all of our stuff and then headed over to my parents' house for dinner. I had a few drinks throughout the night to deal with my mother, and before we knew it, it was 10 p.m., and time to head back to the Airbnb. We pulled up to our rental. Each complex had 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. The one we were staying in was on the top left. However, when we pulled up, we could see a small figure standing between some curtains in the window of the apartment on the top right. Instantly, I felt weird. Who just stares out their window like that? My boyfriend parked, and as I got out, I looked up again. She was still there, still staring at us. As we both walked toward the entry door, I could make out her features. You know how some people just have that crazy look to them? This was her. Mangled brown hair and wide open eyes. She had to be at least 60 or 70, and the frown she had, I've never seen someone so angry. My boyfriend put the key in the door, and we entered. To my surprise, we saw her standing at the top of the stairs. She said nothing, just stood there watching us. She was very small and round, but the way she was standing, you could see her arms and legs were very thin. My boyfriend and I looked at each other for a second, and then began to make our way up. We walked up while she stared us down, but to my amazement, she didn't say anything. She just stared at us with her creepy eyes. I kept looking back as my boyfriend entered the code, and we hurried into the apartment. "What the hell was that?" my boyfriend said softly, looking at me confused. I shook my head, just glad she didn't try to talk to us. Nothing weird happened the rest of the night until we heard banging on the front door. I shot up from bed, just to find that my boyfriend was already awake. The banging was non-stop for maybe a minute or two, until it suddenly went silent. I looked at my phone. It was nearly 4 a.m. Who would be banging on the door at this time? My boyfriend walked towards the door, whispering to me that he was going to look out the peephole to see who was there. I trailed behind him slowly as he inspected. He looked back at me, clearly confused. He then opened the door a little to look around, and I heard him gasp. "What?" I whispered, slowly stepping towards him. Laying on the welcome mat outside the door were dead rats. They looked completely gutted, with only one of them still having its head attached. He closed the door, and we both agreed to contact the host later that day. I tried my best to sleep, but the images of those rats kept replaying in my mind. After a while, I looked at my phone, and it was 6:30. Accepting the fact that I wouldn't be able to get any sleep, I got up to make coffee. As I did, I heard the neighbor's door slam shut. I looked out the kitchen window, which overlooked the parking lot, hoping to get a glimpse of the crazy lady. And there she was, standing and staring at our parked car. Not even looking at what was inside, just staring at it. She looked so focused on our car for the longest time, and then she slowly turned her head to look directly at me. I jumped back a little bit and immediately heard her shriek. This horrible, blood-curdling shriek, like she was being attacked. My boyfriend ran out of the bedroom, obviously alarmed, and we both looked out the window again. The neighbor was standing there holding her head, screaming at the driver's side window. She grabbed the top of the car and started banging her head, screaming things like, "They never leave. When will they leave? Why do they keep coming?" I started recording for insurance purposes, and my boyfriend called the police and then the host. By the time the police showed up, she was lying on the ground next to her car, which had very little damage considering what we just witnessed. The host profusely apologized, said that this had never happened before, and refunded our entire trip. We got to see the lady taken away in handcuffs, though it took her a while to comply. We never found out what was wrong with her, but my theory is something just snapped, and we just happened to be the ones there when it happened. But I do know that you should take every review into consideration when booking an Airbnb, every single one. This happened a few years back when my friends and I had just finished our sophomore year of college. Finally done with school for a few months, we wanted to celebrate a little bit to kick off summer break. All of us had small jobs near the campus, so we saved up some money. We decided to go big and take a trip to Las Vegas for a few days, as none of us had ever been. At first, we were looking through hotels in the city to try and find something cheap, but still big enough for the four of us. Eventually, we gave up on that and started looking at Airbnbs, since most of them were cheaper and bigger. We found a few good ones, but ended up choosing the largest one with the most rooms. Fast forward to a couple of weeks later, our Uber picked us up from the airport and dropped us off at the house. It honestly looked even bigger in person, and we were all really excited to spend the next few days there. We unpacked and relaxed for a couple of hours, as we were a little worn out from the flight. A few hours after the sun went down, my friend Alyssa and I were the only ones still awake. It wasn't too late, probably 8 or 8:30, but the other two had decided to go to bed early. With nothing really to do, Alyssa offered to take a walk outside and explore the neighborhood a little bit. I agreed, eager to see the unique homes. I should mention our Airbnb was a pretty nice house, and the neighboring homes were really nice too. This definitely wasn't a sketchy street or anything, so we didn't even think twice about going for a walk around. We headed outside and down the street. After passing 6 or 7 houses, the street took a sharp turn and connected to another crossing road, with homes on the side. It was strange though, as these homes were nothing like the ones we had just walked by on our street. These were basically rundown shacks. I don't mean to be rude or anything, but it was just really strange to see such a sudden change in homes after only turning the corner. We continued on a little bit, noticing the broken windows, missing mailboxes, and even worn out vacant signs on a lot of the doors. One of the houses even had a sofa chair right in the middle of their front yard, with rips and stains all over it. We agreed to take the next turn towards our Airbnb and head back, but a couple of minutes later, we saw a small SUV coming towards us from down the road with its headlights off. As it got closer, it began to slow down and eventually stopped right next to us. An older woman, probably 50 to 60 years old, rolled down the window and with a big smile said, "You two are such a cute couple." She was making really weird jerky motions with her head and arms and was just acting really strange. I replied, "Thank you," just to end the conversation quickly and get her to leave. Luckily it worked. She continued down the road and we did as well in the opposite direction. After a few minutes, we found the next turn and got back to the street with our Airbnb. We were both really shaken and creeped out by the whole situation and just wanted to get inside and forget about it. But just as we got to the driveway, we saw the old lady's SUV turn down our road and start heading towards us again. We were halfway up the driveway when she stopped right in front of the house. But this time, it was different. She just looked at us. She didn't say anything or show any emotion. She was just staring. Alyssa hurried inside, and I quickly followed. I heard the car continue back down the road as I was closing the door behind us. We stayed up for a little bit longer, locking all the doors and checking the windows to make sure she didn't come back. After an hour, we agreed that we were probably okay, so we went to our rooms and got ready for bed. The next day, we told our other friends what had happened, and they were pretty creeped out too. We ended up telling the owner of the Airbnb about the whole situation, and even asked if we could cancel our third day so we could leave early. Thankfully, he agreed. For the rest of that day, we decided to get away from the house and hang out in the city to try and enjoy at least one of our days in Vegas. We actually ended up having a lot of fun, but as the night closed in, we were ready to call an Uber and head back to the house. During the ride back, I received a text from the owner that said, "Is this the lady from last night?" with a picture attached. I opened it and saw a screenshot from the Ring doorbell footage of the lady standing outside of the house. I replied to the owner and immediately showed all of my friends. We didn't know what to do, so we asked the driver to drop us off at a hotel parking lot just a couple of blocks from our house, while the owner called the police. After about 45 minutes, the owner called me and said the house was clear and we could go back, but he mentioned the police never found the lady. This obviously made none of us feel any better. We got to the house and pretty much immediately started packing all of our stuff, so we could leave right away in the morning. Nothing happened overnight or the next morning, but I can say for sure that none of us got any good sleep. We got out of there as soon as we could and headed for the airport. This was definitely one of the strangest things to ever happen to me, and I still think about it a lot. The only advice I can give is to always check the area around your Airbnb before you book it. I have no idea what she wanted or why she was stalking us, but it really freaks me out to think about what would have happened if the owner didn't have a doorbell camera or if we had stayed that third day.
I live in a small home in a fairly decent neighborhood, and I work from home too. My office is set up in a small room upstairs, with my desk right by a window that faces the front of the house. I loved having that window open for fresh air, especially as fall was just starting. The view was nice, and I'd keep it open pretty much all day. One regular weekday around noon, I was working like usual when I noticed something outside. There was a man standing at the bottom of my driveway. He wasn't walking past, tying his shoe, or doing anything normal. He was just standing there staring up at my house. I couldn't tell if he could see me through the window, but after just a few seconds of me looking at him, he walked away. It was weird, yeah, but I didn't know what to make of it. So I just kept working. I peeked out the window a few times after that, but didn't see anything else, so I didn't think too much of it. The next day, I was back to my usual routine, working, video calls, staying busy. During one of those calls, I spaced out for a second and glanced out the window, and there he was again. Same guy, same spot, standing at the end of my driveway and looking up at the house, just like before. Only this time it felt way creepier. Something about it hit me differently. It was eerie. Why the hell was he back? I must have stared at him too long because one of my coworkers on the video call noticed and asked if I was okay. I told them I was fine and tried to focus again, but I kept glancing back. He stood there for another minute or so, and then, just like that, he was gone again. I couldn't shake it. The whole rest of the day dragged on, and I couldn't stop thinking about that guy. After work, I went outside and walked around my driveway, trying to figure out what he could have been looking at. Everything looked normal, except I realized that from where he stood, he could see directly into my office window. So yeah, he probably saw me staring back at him. Later that night, I was on the phone with my brother and told him about it. He agreed it was weird, but said it was probably nothing. I tried to distract myself by watching TV after we hung up. A couple of hours passed. It was around 9 p.m., and I had the volume turned down because I was getting sleepy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps outside. I froze. They walked up to my front door, stopped for a second, then walked away. I rushed over and looked through the peephole, just in time to see a figure walking down the street. Once they were gone, I opened the door, and there was a note taped to the back. It simply said, "Pat, answer the door." I was confused and terrified. How did they know my name? What did the note even mean? They hadn't even knocked or stayed long enough for me to answer the door. Not that I would have. That was enough for me to call the police. 2 officers came by and I told them everything. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. They took a report and told me to call again if anything else happened. Not exactly reassuring. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just laid there, heart pounding, thinking about that man and the creepy note. Then, just before 2 a.m., there was a knock at the front door. My entire body froze. The house was dead silent, which made the sound even worse. I listened, terrified, as they knocked again. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the line with the operator, the knocking continued. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just steady, unchanging, repeating over and over. The operator said officers were 2 minutes away, and then the knocking slowed. A 15-second pause, then 30, then it stopped. When the cops arrived, nobody was there. Again. I told them everything, and this time they took it a bit more seriously. They said they'd patrol the area for a couple of weeks. Those weeks came and went. No sign of the man, no knocks, nothing. At least not that I noticed. It's been a few months now and still nothing. But it still haunts me. That note, that 2 a.m. knocking. The way he just stood there twice, staring up at my house. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, or if he's truly gone for good. But the thought of him possibly coming back, that terrifies me more than anything. This was when I was a freshman in high school. The town I lived in was small, and I guess you could say pretty old-fashioned compared to places nowadays. It was very woodsy all around, and the buildings and houses weren't so compacted together. My home was out in the woods. My parents had a decent amount of land, and my dad had built the place with his dad. Anyway, it didn't have a real road or a driveway, it was more of a dirt trail. So, the school buses didn't have a stop at our place. I'd either have to walk a mile to my friend's house to get picked up, or just walk the extra distance straight to school. Usually, I just walked all the way to school. This was a typical day as far as I could tell. I was walking down the trail from my home, enjoying the calm morning sounds of the woods, when I spotted a car up ahead. It wasn't my parents' car or anyone else's that I knew, and it was just parked right on the trail. This trail only led to and from our house, so someone being on it was unusual. I don't know if I'd ever seen a random car there before at all. I felt kind of uncomfortable having to pass it. There was a woman inside. She looked 35 or 40 with dark circles under her eyes and shaggy black hair. She glanced at me, but I just looked down. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked past, though. I picked up the pace and got to school. At the dinner table that night, I mentioned it to my parents, asking who it was and why they were there. Both of them looked worried and confused. They told me the woman must have just gotten lost and that I shouldn't worry about it, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They dropped me off at school for the next week, which was odd because they both started work early, like 6 a.m., so they must have called in late for the entire week just to drive me. Honestly, I thought it was an overreaction, as I felt I was old enough to handle myself, but I knew my parents were just being safe. On Monday morning of the following week, I packed up my book bag and started walking. During the last week that I'd been dropped off, we never saw the woman or the car again, so I really wasn't worried at all anymore. However, this time when I got to that same spot in the woods, she was there again, sitting in her car, watching me. I had a mini heart attack. This was too much to be a coincidence. Showing up twice on the trail that was basically our driveway, sitting in the same spot, and only appearing when I was walking alone, I made the decision to cut through the woods instead of walking past her again. I took a few steps off the trail, but immediately the woman noticed. She turned her car on and drove up closer to me. I pretended to ignore her, walking faster into the woods. I heard her car door open and her footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. But then she called out my name, like my full name, in this eerie, calm, almost loving voice. I turned my head and looked at her. She had this dead stare and a blank, expressionless face. Her eyes were tired and heavy, and she has this sickly look. I sprinted away, and after losing sight of her, I circled back through the woods to my house, where I called my parents. They called the police and came home right away. What I didn't expect was for my parents to know exactly who the woman was. It was my dad's ex-wife from almost 2 decades ago. Apparently, she'd had mental health issues for a while and would have these horrifying episodes where she'd get obsessed with something or someone and do disturbing things. The day I told them I saw her, my parents reported it to the police, knowing it had to be her. The police failed to do anything about it, though, only checking up on her and saying she seemed normal. For that whole week, she had been stalking our house, knowing that every time my parents left for work early, it meant I would be walking alone to school. My parents never told me what happened to her after that, what she was trying to do to me, or why she was doing any of it. Hopefully, nothing like that ever happens again. This was in 2019. I worked at a grocery store, usually closing shifts, and I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. We had a lot of regulars at our store, customers that would come in all the time and usually around the same time as well. One of these customers was a guy that came in right before closing a couple of times a week. Nobody knew his name, but everybody knew of him, because nobody liked customers that came in 10 minutes before the store closed. Usually, being the only cashier, I'd be the one interacting with him. He was always a bit strange. He didn't talk much and always had a tired look on his face. This night he came in as he always did, right before closing, grabbing a couple of things and coming up to the register. I scanned everything, he paid, and he left. We didn't exchange any words aside from a simple greeting. 10 minutes later, I closed down the register and spent a few minutes cleaning up, clocking out, and leaving at 10:15. As I walked out to my car, I noticed the man was still in the parking lot. He was standing awkwardly outside of his car, with his hands at his sides, just looking at the store. I got in my car and went home. I didn't have work the following day, so I stayed up a bit later than usual. I didn't get into bed until probably 1 a.m. Only moments after getting under the covers, though. A bright light glared into my bedroom through one of the windows. I thought it was a neighbor pulling in, so I didn't really care about it. After a second, the light shut off, which unconsciously confirmed for me that it was just headlights. I fell asleep only a couple of minutes later. I woke up in the night to what I thought was my phone ringing. The way I woke up, half asleep and in the middle of a dream, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I rubbed my eyes and tapped my phone on the nightstand. It was blank. No messages, no missed calls. Nothing had come in. I wasn't sure what to think. I was going to just ignore it and go back to sleep, as I wasn't even fully awake yet to begin with. But then the slightest thing caught my eye as I rolled back over. The bedroom door was barely cracked open, not even enough to let any light in or anything. It was just uneven with the door frame, not latched shut. I always closed the door to my room, so seeing it not fully shut immediately woke me up. I got out of bed and walked over, pushing it closed to see if maybe it was stuck for some reason. It smoothly latched into the door frame, just like it always did. So there was no way I'd mistakenly left it open. I felt my body get shaky. My heart was pounding. But even with everything pointing otherwise, I still tried to convince myself that this was somehow nothing. I tried to think of any possible way that this wasn't something to worry about, but my mind thought back to the light I saw before falling asleep. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a car parked in my driveway. I could only see the back half of it, but I instantly felt a rush of panic. Who was at my house? And was someone inside with me? I hurried over to the door again and flicked on the lights. I stood there by the door, panicking and thinking, realizing I should call 911 just to be safe. I looked at the nightstand that my phone was on, and just before I started to walk over there, I saw an eye looking back at me from a crack in the closet. My body shook and I let out a gasp, then spun around and sprinted out of my house. By the time I found a neighbor that would answer their door and call the police for me, at least 15 minutes had gone by already. The car in my driveway was still there when officers showed up, but the man was gone. It didn't take long for them to use the car to track him down, though, and I felt nauseous when it turned out to be the man from the grocery store. His reasonings for everything didn't make any sense, but it was clear he'd had his eye on me for a while now, and he was not meant to. I think the only reason I'd woken up that night was because the man's phone rang while he was hiding, and he silenced it just as I woke up. If not for that, I don't know what would have happened to me, or if I'd even be here right now.
Me and my older brother Cameron were doing a camping trip on the East Coast. Cameron chose the sites and everything like he usually did, and I just tagged along. He chose well, though. The campsite was really nice, and since we had to hike to get there, it wasn't crowded. There was nobody around from what we could see. The campsite wasn't very defined, though. It was hard to tell if we were even in the right spot. There were several openings in the trees that looked like they could have been the place we were supposed to be at, but neither of us thought it mattered. We set up on one of the grassy openings, and while we initially thought this place wasn't very active, we started to notice we were wrong. There were leftover things scattered around. Nothing big like entire tents or anything, but just small things like a trekking pole or some old shoes. It wasn't normal for these things to be left behind, though. Not at campsites like this that were far out. We both thought it was weird, but we went on with our day. We didn't really do much, just hung out and talked. When it got darker out, we lit up a fire and sat around it. A couple hours into the night, I happened to spot something behind Cameron. I pointed at it, not sure what it was. Both of us looked, and after a few moments, we were able to tell that it was a small campfire. It was really far out and partially blocked by all the trees, but the tiny orange flame was flickering in the distance. Had it not been for the moonlight being covered by the clouds and the absolute darkness of the woods, there was no way we would have been able to notice it. I guess we weren't alone, though it was a little odd that they were out in that direction because it seemed like it was just forest over there. No openings or anything to really set up a campsite. Maybe they wanted to be away from other people or something. We didn't think about it too much. We got some snacks and drinks out and talked ourselves into exhaustion. We put out the fire and went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep pretty comfortably, not having any trouble at all, though I woke up at some point in the night. It must have only been an hour or two after I'd gone to sleep. I knew exactly why I had woken up, though. I drank a bit too much right before bed, needing to relieve myself. I got up and unzipped the tent. I walked out maybe 50 feet from the campsite to make sure I didn't attract any animals and did my business. But as I was out there, I noticed the flame way out in the forest was still lit up. Maybe it was because I was tired, or just out of it for some reason. But I stood there and stared at it for a minute. I don't even know why, but my eyes began adjusting to the dark as I stood there. As I looked out into the woods, I suddenly noticed something else. It looked like a figure somewhere far out between me and the distant flame I was looking at. I felt a shock for a moment, but I told myself it couldn't actually be a person. It had to be a weird-looking bush or something. Like there was no way someone was out in the dark, outside our camp, at this time of night. But I kept looking, trying to make out what I could, when I started to notice more of these figure-like shadows in the woods. They were so far, and it was so dark. I couldn't tell if my mind was just playing tricks on me. If they were people, though, there were at least 10 or 15 of them, and they seemed to all be looking right at me. Another shock ran through me. What the hell is this? I almost thought I was hallucinating. I turned around and hurried back to the tent. I debated for a second whether to wake Cameron up. I knew if it was nothing, I would never hear the end of it, but my gut was telling me otherwise. I opened his tent and shook him awake. He was really confused at first, but I just told him I thought I saw something and wanted a second opinion. He hesitantly got up, and I started to lead him out to where I was, but we didn't get very far. The figures I had seen had moved. They were closer, standing all spread out among the trees. I really hoped at this point I was just seeing things, but I slowly looked back at Cameron and could see the pale, fear-covered expression on his face, his eyes wide open. He saw what I saw. I looked back out, and it was more apparent than ever that these were people. I could see their subtle movements as they stood there and watched us. We backed up towards our tents. Should we leave? I can still vividly remember Cameron's shaky voice as he spoke those words. He was always so confident and sure of what to do. It was terrifying seeing and hearing him like that. I nodded, and neither of us grabbed any of our stuff aside from the car keys and our wallets. We hurried away and down the trail. It seemed that they didn't follow us. We reported what happened to the police, feeling it was necessary. They didn't take it too seriously, though, very clearly thinking we were crazy, like there was no way a whole group of people were out in the woods at night messing with us. We thought about the strange amount of left-behind things we saw in the area and had hoped others had already gone to the police about similar encounters, but nobody had. There were no official accounts of anything happening there. Maybe they just went unreported, or maybe nobody ever made it back to report it.
This was 2 years ago, in the middle of spring. I had taken time off work to go camping at a small lake in northern Minnesota. It was a place I'd been to a couple of times with friends or family that decided to join me, but this time, it was just me. The hike to get there took about 2 hours, but it wasn't too rigorous, mostly just flat trail all the way there. I set up my tent and other things a bit into the woods, so as to not be right up against the lake. Then I unfolded my chair, popped open a beer, and listened to the calm sounds of the water and the birds chirping. It was already late into the day, so I didn't have much time before the sun started going down. I always enjoyed nighttime in the woods, though. It was always so quiet and almost felt freeing in a way. I don't know how else to describe it. However, this night was different. Once the sun went down, I built up a campfire and continued relaxing. Yet, this feeling came over me that usually didn't happen. I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking around at the trees and the darkness that surrounded me, having this uneasy, almost paranoid feeling. I was never like this, so I wasn't sure what was going on. Every time I looked around, though, I didn't see anything at all. The problem was that it was so dark. I'm not sure I would have been able to see anything, even if there was something, or someone, out there watching me. Of course, with no real reason to feel the way I did my best to suppress the thoughts and try to ease my mind away from it. Eventually, I was able to distract myself by thinking about some personal stuff I had going on in my life. It wasn't a fun distraction, but I guess it was better than being paranoid. Hours passed. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 by this point, when there was a very sudden and loud crack in front of me, like a large stick snapping under heavy weight from somewhere right ahead of me. It was pitch black out there. I couldn't see anything. The sound was so loud, though. It echoed across the woods. A shiver ran through me. It sounded like something heavy stepping on a branch. Was it a large animal, or was it a person? I wasn't sure which I was more afraid of. I pulled out my bear spray, then called out, "Hello? Someone out there?" There was not even the slightest sound in response to my voice. I couldn't help but feel like if it were a large animal, I would have heard them walking around, brushing up against the bushes, and crunching the leaves. I kind of just sat there for a minute, staring out into the dark, and waiting to see or hear something before I remembered I'd brought a flashlight with me. I dug through my backpack and grabbed it, but by then, it had already been a minute or two. When I shined it out there, it was empty. Nothing out there at all. Obviously, I was starting to feel paranoid again, but this time, it felt justified. I quickly tended to the fire, adding in some more wood to make sure it didn't burn out, and stayed bright enough to light up my campsite. Every couple of minutes, I turned my flashlight back on and just scanned the area. Then, one time, I turned it on, and I immediately saw something at the far end of the light. It was a person. Definitely a man. They were freakishly tall, not like inhuman or anything, but maybe like 6 feet 5 inches. They instantly moved out of the light, going further back where the light couldn't reach. My adrenaline was pumping. Had my gut feeling been right this whole time? I thought back to the sound I heard earlier, and how it sounded like something large enough to make such a loud crack. The guy I saw was huge. At that height, he was probably 250 pounds at least. It had to have been him, which means he was out there watching me for who knows how long. I panicked, taking down my tent and shoving my belongings into my backpack. I knew which way he ran from the light, so I ran off in the opposite direction, which also happened to be back toward my car. After a while, I felt safe enough to turn my flashlight on the dim setting and walk the rest of the way. While I walked, I tried to think up reasons for him being out there. Something definitely would have happened. I have no doubt about it. But the guy was huge. Why didn't he just attack me or rob me right away? Why wait and watch me? The only thing I could think of is if he might have been trying to see if I had a gun or a weapon on me. Or he could have just been waiting for me to go to sleep. I got back to my car and drove home. I still go out camping, but it's never been the same since that night. Now, I always have that paranoid feeling, like I'm being watched from somewhere that I can't see. Hopefully, it's just a feeling.
This happened a while ago. I want to say 2014. I live in a pretty woodsy town with lots of forest around it and plenty of small campgrounds within an hour or so. I had a 4-day weekend off from work and I hadn't gotten out in a while. So I decided to head to one of these campgrounds for a laid-back weekend camping trip. The campground I chose was a small one where you park in a dirt area and choose one of the 3 sites they had to set up your tent. There were already fire pits set up and even some grills and benches. They looked awful, but I guess some people still use them. All 3 spots were open and no other cars were there, so I just chose the one on the far left and put all my things over there. The walk from my truck to the campsite was only about 5 minutes, but the area was very densely covered in trees, so it still felt like I was fully in the woods. Plus, the actual campground was about 45 minutes from town as well. It was about an hour in that I realized I had no idea what to do. Should I just sit here and relax, read a book? I didn't really know. I thought maybe there was a trail or something I could walk on, so I went back to where the entrance was to see if there was anything. There wasn't, but there was another car next to mine now. It was an old red Toyota, like really old, rusted all around with dents and scratches all over. One really strange thing I noticed about it was that it didn't have a license plate on either the front or the back. I didn't really know what to think, but I figured they must have been camping at one of the other spots. With no trail to explore, I went back to my campsite and just sat on a log. After only 10 minutes, I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I looked back. There was a guy walking down the trail. He had no backpack or anything, and he was looking right at me, like he was coming down just to talk to me or ask me something. The man looked like he was in his 30s, but he almost looked older because of how he was put together, or rather, not put together. His brown jacket had holes all over it and was covered in stains, and his beard and hair were oily and shaggy. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. Having nothing to do, I said, "Sure," and stood up. But he quickly said, "Thank you," and told me that he was just asking for now. He still had some things to do first, but he was going to come back in a little bit and get me when he needed a hand. I said, "Okay." He thanked me again, then walked away. I wasn't too sure why he came by if he didn't need me right now, but I figured he probably just had to unpack his car first and would be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I sat and waited, but a half hour passed, then another. By then, the sun was going down, and I figured he must have gotten it done himself, whatever it was. 2 hours later, I'd completely forgotten about it. I had the fire pit lit up and was making my dinner when I heard footsteps behind me again. I looked back, but this time, it was eerily dark. I could hear his footsteps coming down the trail, but he was completely covered in darkness. I couldn't even see his silhouette. I listened to the crunching steps against the gravel slowly make their way into the light of my campfire. It was the same man, just as I thought. I didn't understand why he came back though. It was so late now. "Hey, you ready?" "Just need a little help still," he said. With what?" I asked. He noticed my hesitation. "It'll only take a minute. You aren't busy by the looks of it," he said jokingly with a smile. But it felt odd, like he was being pushy. He also avoided my question. My social awkwardness kind of failed me here though, because I nervously agreed, knowing I really had nothing else to do, and it was obvious. He smiled again and started leading the way. As we got further from my campfire, it got way darker, and I realized how odd it was that he walked here without a flashlight. It also felt strange following him into the dark. "Hey, so what was it you needed my help for?" I asked. He slowed down for a split second, like he was going to say something, but then he continued walking and didn't answer. I felt my heart rate spiking. My body knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence of the forest around me felt disturbingly eerie, like a calm before the storm. I began slowing down, trying to put some distance between us without it being too obvious. I only managed to get a few feet away before he turned around and looked at me. He had a creepy, fake smile that immediately shifted into a frown when he saw me further away. He stopped walking, and so did I. Before I could say anything, I saw his hand reach down into his jacket, and I immediately turned and sprinted deeper into the woods. After just seeing the handle of what I could only assume was a knife, I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground and his heavy breathing as he chased me through the dark. For probably a good 2 minutes. Then he started slowing down, and eventually it was just the sound of me running through the woods. Luckily, I had my phone and keys on me, so I called 911. When they got to the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The red car was gone. And so was the man. I described everything for them, as both the car and the man had such a distinct look. But that information wasn't enough. I think it's pretty clear what was about to happen that night. But there doesn't seem to be any reason why, aside from the fact that I was camping alone. The way the man waited until night to try it, and how he came by during the day so that I'd be more likely to follow him later, is terrifyingly manipulative. I'm worried others may fall victim to it, or possibly already have.